Hegel, The Philosophy of Mind, Section 2, The Objective of Mind, Subsection B, The Morality of Conscience, Moralitat, Encyclopedia Section 503, The free individual, who in mere law counts only as a person, is now characterized as a subject. A will reflected into itself so that, be its affection what it may, it is distinguished as existing in it, as its own from the existence of freedom in an external thing. Because the affection of the will is thus inwardized, the will is at the same time made a particular, and there arise further particularizations of it and relations of these to one another. This affection is partly the essential and implicit will, the reason of the will, the essential basis of law and moral life. Partly it is the existent volition, which is before us and throws itself into actual deeds, and thus comes into relationship with the former. The subjective will is morally free, so far as these features are its inward institution, its own, and willed by it. Its utterance, indeed, with this freedom is an action, in the externality of which it only admits as its own, and allows to be imputed to it, so much as it has consciously willed. This subjective or moral freedom is what a European especially calls freedom. In virtue of the right thereto, a man must possess a personal knowledge of the distinction between good and evil in general. Ethical and religious principles shall not merely lay their claim on him as external laws and precepts of authority to be obeyed, but have their assent, recognition, or even justification in his heart, sentiment, consciousness, but have their assent, recognition, or even justification in his heart, sentiment, conscience, intelligence, and similar. The subjectivity of the will in itself is its supreme aim and absolutely essential to it. The moral must be taken in the wider sense, in which it does not signify the morally good merely. In French, le moral is opposed to le physique and means the mental or intellectual in general. But here the moral signifies volitional mode, so far as it is in the interior of the will in general. It thus includes purpose and intention, and also moral wickedness. Hegel, Philosophy of Mind, Section 2, The Objective of Mind, Subsection B, The Morality of Conscience, Moralität. Subsection A, Purpose, Der Vorsatz. Encyclopedia Section 504. So far as the action comes into immediate touch with existence, my part in it is to this extent formal, that external existence is also dependent on the agent. So far as the action comes into immediate touch with existence, my part in it is to this extent formal, that external existence is also independent of the agent. This externality can pervert action and bring to light something else than lay in it. Now, though any alteration as such, which is set on foot by the subject's action, is its deed, that still the subject does not, for that reason, recognize as its action, Handlung, but only admits as its own that existence in the deed which lay in its knowledge and will, which was its purpose. Only for that does it hold itself responsible. Hegel, Philosophy of Mind, Section 2, The Objective of Mind. Subsection B, The Morality of Conscience, Moralitet. Super subsection B, Intention and Welfare, Die Absicht und das Wohl. Encyclopedia section 505. As regards its empirically concrete content, and for section 1, the action has a variety of particular aspects and connections. In point of form, the agent must know in point of form, the agent in point of form, the agent must have known and willed the action in its essential feature. Embracing these individual points, this is the right of intention, while purpose affects only the immediate fact of existence. Intention regards the underlying essence and aim thereof. And for section 2, the agent has no less the right to see that the particularity of content in the action in point of its matter is not something external to him, but is a particularity of his own, that it contains his needs, interests, and aims. These aims, when similarly comprehended in a single aim, as in happiness, see section 479, constitutes his well being. This is the right to well being. Happiness, good fortune, is distinguished from well being only in this, that happiness implies no more than some sort of immediate existence, whereas well being regards it as also justified as regards morality. Encyclopedia section 506. But the essentiality of the intention is in the first instance the abstract form of generality. Reflection can put in this form this and that particular aspect in the empirically concrete action, thus making it essential to the intention or restricting the intention to it. In this way, the supposed essentiality of the intention and the real essentiality of the action may be brought into the greatest contradiction. In essence, a good intention in case of a crime. Similarly, well being is abstract and may be set on this or that, and as appertaining to this single agent, it is always something particular. Hegel, Philosophy of Mind, Section 2, The Objective of Mind, Subsection B, The Morality of Conscience, Moralität, Super Subsection C, Goodness and Wickedness, Das Gute und das Böse. Encyclopedia section 507, The truth of these particularities and the concrete unity of their formalism is the content of the universal, essential, and actual will, the law and underlying essence of every phase of volition, the essential and actual good. It is thus the absolute final aim of the world and duty for the agent who ought to have insight into the good, make it his intention, and bring it about by his activity. Encyclopedia section 508. But though the good is the universal of will, a universal determined in itself, and thus including in it particularity, still, so far as this particularity is in the first instance still abstract, there is no principle at hand to determine it. Such determination therefore starts up also outside that universal, and as heteronomy or determinants of a will which is free and has rights of its own. There awakes here the deepest contradiction. Infrasection A. Infrasection alpha. In consequence of the indeterminate determinism of the good, there are always several sorts of good and many kinds of duties, the variety of which is a dialectic of one against another and brings them into collision. At the same time, because good is one, they ought to stand in harmony. And yet each of them, though it is a particular duty, is as good and as duty absolute. It falls upon the agent to be the dialectic which, superseding this absolute claim of each, concludes such a combination of them as excludes the rest. Encyclopedia section 509, infrasection beta, to the agent who in his existent sphere of liberty is essentially as a particular, his interest and welfare must, on account of that existent sphere of liberty, be essentially an aim and therefore a duty. But at the same time, in aiming at the good, which is the not particular, but only universal of the will, the particular interest ought not to be a constituent motive. On account of this independency of the two principles of action, it is likewise an accident whether they harmonize, and yet they ought to harmonize, because the agent, as individual and universal, is always fundamentally one identity. Infrasection gamma. But the agent is not only a mere particular in his existence, it is also a form of his existence to be an abstract self certainty, an abstract reflection of freedom into himself. He is thus distinct from the reason and the will, and capable of making the universal itself a particular, and in that way a semblance. He is thus distinct from the reason and the will, and capable of making the universal itself a particular, and in that way a semblance. The good is thus reduced to the level of a mere may happen for the agent, who can therefore resolve itself to somewhat opposite to the good, can be wicked. Encyclopedia section 510, infrasection delta. The external objectivity following the distinction which has arisen in the subjective will, see Encyclopedia section 503, constitutes a peculiar world of its own, another extreme which stands in no rapport with the internal will determination. It is thus a matter of chance whether it harmonizes with the subjective aims, whether the good is realized and the wicked, an aim essentially and actually nullified in it. It is no less matter of chance whether the agent finds in it his well being, and more precisely whether in the world the good agent is happy and the wicked unhappy. But at the same time, the world ought to allow the good action, the essential thing, to be carried out in it. It ought to grant the good agent the satisfaction of his particular interest, and refuse it to the wicked, just as it ought also to make the wicked itself null and void. Infrasection, uh, Encyclopedia section 511, the all around contradiction expressed by the repeated ought, with its absoluteness, which yet at the same time is not, contains the most abstract analysis of the mind in itself, its deepest descent into itself, the only relation the self contradictory principles have to one another is in the abstract certainty of self, and for this infinitude of subjectivity, the universal will, good, right, and duty no more exist than not. The subjectivity alone is aware of itself as choosing and deciding. This pure self certitude, rising to its pitch, appears in the two directly inter this pure self certitude, rising to its pitch, appears in the two directly interchanging forms of consciousness, of conscience, and wickedness. This pure self certitude, rising to its pitch, appears in the two directly interchanging forms of conscience and wickedness. The former is the will of goodness, but a goodness which to this pure subjectivity is the non objective, non universal, the unutterable, and over which the agent is conscious that he in his individuality has the decision. Wickedness is the same awareness that the single self possesses, the decision, so far as the single self does not merely remain in this abstraction, but takes up the content of a subjective interest contrary to the good. Encyclopedia section 512, this supreme pitch of the phenomenon of will, sublimating itself to this absolute vanity, to a goodness which has no objectivity, but is only sure of itself, and a self assurance which involves the nullification of the universal, collapses by its own force. Wickedness, as the most intimate reflection of subjectivity itself, in opposition to the object and universal, which it treats as mere sham, is the same as the good sentiment of abstract goodness, which reserves to the subjectivity the determination thereof. The utterly abstract semblance, the bare perversion and annihilation of itself. The result? The truth of this semblance is, on its negative side, the absolute nullity of this volition, which would fain hold its own against the good, and of the good, which would only be abstract. On the affirmative side, in the notion, the semblance thus collapsing is the same simple universality of the will, which is the good. The subjectivity in this, its identity with the good, is only the infinite form, which actualizes and develops it. In this way, the standpoint of bare reciprocity between two independent sides, the standpoint of the ought, is abandoned, and we have passed into the field of ethical life. End of subsection B, the morality of conscience. Moralitate.